Hi, my name is Maddie, and today I want to talk about extinction. Now, for those of you who don't know, extinction is a behavior change procedure which is part of applied behavior analysis, also known as ABA. So, to begin, let us figure out exactly what extinction is. Extinction is a behavior change procedure in which reinforcement for a previously reinforced behavior is discontinued, and the effect is that the behavior is likely to decrease in the future. To elaborate, here is an example. You have a class clown. Let's call him Jimmy. Real annoying, always disrupting the learning, never paying attention, and constantly interrupting the teacher. This behavior has previously been reinforced by the teacher giving the class clown attention. Basically, the "hey, please stop that" or the "go in the hallway" was acting as reinforcement for Jimmy's behavior. So, the teacher stops giving that reinforcement. An effect of this could be that Jimmy's behavior decreases in the future. By taking away that reinforcement, they have implemented extinction, whether intentional or not. Now, there's a lot to unpack here. First, I want to say that this is a very basic example, just enough for you to get the idea of what extinction is, and it certainly doesn't give us an example of the consequences and side effects of such a procedure. So, you all get it? Okay, so now it's time for part 2. Let's get deeper into what extinction is and extinction procedures. So, let's start off with the easiest to understand in my opinion, behavior maintained by positive reinforcement. This is basically talking about the procedures involving implementing extinction on behaviors that are maintained with positive reinforcement. This one's going to be real quick, I promise. So, basically, when behaviors maintained by positive reinforcement are placed on extinction, it means that those behaviors do not produce the reinforcement anymore. An example of this is kind of like a toddler. So, let's set the scene. A toddler cries every time their parents leave the room. The crying doesn't stop until the parents come back into the room. Therefore, it seems like the behavior, the crying, is reinforced by the parents coming into the room. If we were to put this behavior on extinction, it would look something like this. The parents will leave the room. The toddler is likely to start crying. But instead of going back into the room, the parents then ignore the crying. It is likely that the crying will increase in intensity, and the behavior will likely become worse before it gets better, but we will discuss that when we talk more about the effects of extinction. Alright, next up we have extinction of a behavior maintained by negative reinforcement. That is where we get into escape extinction. Escape extinction is basically just that. The problem behavior is put on extinction when the behavior does not produce the removal of an aversive stimulus. Basically, it means that the person cannot escape an aversive situation. That sounds upsetting, right? Yeah, certainly doesn't sound fun. So, let's go back to Jimmy for a sec. Imagine that the reason he is disruptive in class is because he doesn't know how to read. Therefore, he tries to escape the classroom setting to get away from reading because the teacher sends Jimmy into the hallway when he disrupts class. So, to break it down, disrupting class, the behavior, is reinforced by the teacher removing the student from the classroom. Now imagine taking that reinforcement away. So the student disrupts the class, but instead of taking the student outside, the teacher makes the student stay in class. That is the gist of this procedure. So this next one is a bit tricky. It is the extinction of a behavior that is actually maintained by automatic reinforcement. So, automatic reinforcement can be described as reinforcement that is not delivered by the deliberate actions of another person. It is separate from social aspects in that sense. I think it'll be easier to understand with an example. So I'm actually going to take a page from my own little memory book and take you back to 2007, where a little Maddie was often found running her tongue against her upper lip and philtrum, the area above the upper lip, to the point of it actually causing sores. I think it was a comfort thing for little me. It felt nice in the moment and made me calm down. But my mom saw that the blisters were getting pretty bad, so she called up the doc and lo and behold, they made a plan. Since the behavior tended to happen more when we went out places like the grocery store, the doctor suggested that before we go to the store, she take some antibacterial cream and later Vicks once the sores had healed enough, and put it on my upper lip to prevent me from licking that area because it tasted really gross. Eventually, after many attempts at trying to wipe off the cream or lick through it, little me gave up and the behavior eventually stopped. Basically, what my mother and the doctor did was they removed that sensory consequence that came from me licking my lips. It no longer felt nice when I licked my lips. It was, in fact, really gross and upsetting. But I think this leads to the question of, what if I didn't stop? What if it got worse? What if I got angry or lashed out? This section will cover that. We are going to be talking about what I personally believe the most interesting part of extinction, the secondary effects. Extinction burst, we got it. Spontaneous recovery, we got it. Aggression, of course, we have it all. So, let me just get this out here. Extinction isn't a gentle procedure. People really don't tend to like it when you take away their reinforcers. They'll kick, they'll scream, they'll beg, they'll bargain, you name it. That is why we are focusing on the secondary effects. They tend to be very profound. This is where you begin to understand exactly what we mean by saying that extinction is a heavily intrusive and typically aversive procedure, and why it shouldn't just be done willy-nilly. So, let's start off with the concept I find easiest to understand. Extinction burst. This is a fairly common effect of extinction, where there is an immediate increase in frequency of the response after removing the reinforcement. This is basically something you'd expect, really. So let's go back to that crying toddler. The toddler is crying and is realizing that their parents aren't coming back into the room, so they cry louder, and louder, and louder. They cry more. The parents still don't come in. You might find that the intensity of the behavior has increased. The next night, instead of just crying, the toddler may throw a tantrum. This goes on until eventually the behavior dies out as the toddler essentially realizes that no one is coming, no matter how much they cry, stomp, or scream. I like to think of it as calling out someone's name, and they don't hear you. So you call louder, and they still don't hear you. Therefore, you get louder and louder until you eventually come to the conclusion that they just don't hear you, and they likely won't anytime soon. Overall, you could just expect the behavior to get worse before it gets better. Next up is something interesting. It is a phenomenon that is commonly associated specifically with extinction. This would be spontaneous recovery. Imagine having essentially reached your target goal in an extinction procedure. The behavior is at a point where it is at either a level of pre-reinforcement or it's just gone. You really have the satisfaction that you implemented this procedure with fidelity and caution, and it worked out. Congrats! But then, after a bit, you realize the behavior has come back, despite the fact that it had been diminished to low levels or completely gone. That certainly sounds like a disappointing twist, right? Basically, what's happening is the behavior that was diminished during extinction is recurring, even though that behavior does not produce any sort of reinforcement anymore. Good news is that this is typically short-lived, and if you just keep on with the extinction procedure, you should be golden. Finally, we get to a response that can be worrying and sometimes scary. I'm talking about aggression. Emotional outburst and aggression are some things that may occur when extinction is implemented. Taking away that reinforcer can incur a strong response. This can range from things like whining and crying to other things like violent or escape behavior. So, next up, based on all these effects, I think it leads to my next point. Yes, my old friend, the humane hierarchy. If you don't already know, this is basically a chart showing us the least to most intrusive procedures for behavior change. The lower you get on the chart, the more intrusive and typically aversive the procedure. These are the last resort procedures that you do not use unless you have milked every other procedure you can, or if the behavior is extreme and harmful to the patient or others. If you look right here, you will see that extinction falls beside negative punishment and reinforcement. It is right towards the bottom. I'm sure we can infer what this means based on what we've discussed. It's an intrusive procedure, and you should make sure you have looked down every other avenue before using it. So this really leads to the next section involved with talking about the ethics of extinction and the proper ways to use extinction effectively. First, let's go over the guidelines to use extinction more effectively. They proceed as follows. 1. Withhold all reinforcers maintaining the problem behavior. The first step in using extinction is to identify and withhold all reinforcement for the target behavior. All the effectiveness of extinction relies on identifying the correct consequences that maintain that problem behavior. Functional assessments are a great aspect used to determine these things. Next, you must withhold reinforcement consistently. Consistent applications must be in place in order for the extinction to be effective. An example would be like with the toddler in the bed and the parents trying to stop it. If they were to give in and go to the child when they started crying one night, yet still kept it up other nights, then the extinction procedure has been ruined. This just negates the effectiveness of the extinction procedure entirely. The guideline after this suggests that you will find it much more effective to combine extinction with other procedures. They say that 2 is better than 1. This really tends to be the case when working with behavior change procedures. The effectiveness of extinction seems to increase when combined with things like positive and differential reinforcement. Next up, plan for extinction-produced aggression. When a procedure is so likely to produce effects such as aggression that professionals have to plan to deal with aggression in a way that doesn't reinforce the individual, we are probably looking at something pretty serious. The last one we will talk about is guarding against unintentional extinction. Sometimes desirable behaviors are put on extinction unintentionally. The best thing to do is to continue to reinforce behaviors that need to be maintained. This then leads to the question of when do you not use extinction? First off, do not use extinction when the behavior is harmful. When behavior is harmful, then it is in the best interest to use the most quick and humane procedure available. Therefore, extinction as a singular intervention is really just not recommended. Second, do not use extinction if all sources of reinforcement cannot be withheld. As we talked about with the guidelines, you must be able to withhold all reinforcers maintaining the problem behavior. If you can't do that, then the procedure is just doomed from the start, really. Finally, if you're expecting a quicker procedure or you need rapid reduction in behavior, extinction is not for you. It really is more time consuming, therefore, you really can't use it alone and expect a quick change. Now, it seems we have come to the end of this little video. Just want to remind everyone that this is a pretty basic overview of extinction. I haven't covered everything here, and this isn't something I would recommend implementing yourself without any training. Please guys, let's just go see a professional. Anyway, thanks for watching. Whew, this really took a lot of effort to make. I'm gonna go take a nap. See ya.